Yeah, I think stuff to do with family overwhelms me quite a bit. You know, worry or stress around family side of things, that does overwhelm me quite a bit.
What if everything you thought you knew about the royal family was carefully constructed by one person? The palace has been shaken to its core. But this time, the earthquake didn't come from tabloids or outside attacks. It came from within, from a discovery so shocking that Prince William made a decision no one ever expected. He wants Camilla completely removed from the royal family. Not sidelined, not reduced in duties, removed. And what he uncovered to reach this explosive conclusion has left King Charles devastated, the palace in chaos, and the entire monarchy facing its greatest internal crisis in modern history. Tonight, I'm going to walk you through exactly what happened, from the secret file that started it all to the moment William stood before his father and said words that can never be taken back. I have to warn you, what you're about to hear involves manipulation, betrayal, and a pattern of deception so calculated that it makes every royal controversy you've ever heard about pale in comparison. Are you ready? Because by the end of this, you'll understand why William believes the crown itself is at stake. Let's begin with the morning that changed everything. The secret file. November 29th, early morning. The palace still wrapped in its usual quiet. William's phone buzzed with an urgent message. He was needed immediately in the East Wing's restricted archive room. Now, let me ask you something. When was the last time you received a message so urgent that it made your stomach drop? That feeling that something fundamental was about to change. That's what William felt as his footsteps echoed through empty corridors. The restricted archive room was a place rarely opened even for senior royals. It contained documents, communications, and records that were meant to stay buried, protected by protocols that most palace staff never questioned. The heavy door opened with a soft click. Inside, the small room was bare, except for a single desk and a computer screen glowing in the dim light. A sealed digital file sat waiting, marked with his name and today's date. No explanation, no context, just his name in bold letters. William sat down slowly, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. A strange feeling settled in his chest, part curiosity, part dread. He clicked open the file. What he saw made his hands grow cold. These were Camilla's private communications, months of them, messages to palace staff, recordings of private conversations, decisions made behind closed doors, and each one told the same story, a pattern of deliberate actions designed to undermine him. William scrolled further, his breath catching in his throat. There were instructions to staff about limiting his access to certain meetings, messages redirecting important palace matters away from his desk, subtle changes to protocols that weakened his position as heir. But here's where it gets truly disturbing. The documents showed something even worse: systematic targeting of Catherine. His wife's schedule had been manipulated, her public appearances quietly reduced, her suggestions for royal engagements dismissed before they ever reached William. There were even recordings of Camilla speaking to advisors about Catherine's influence, her tone sharp and dismissive. She needs to understand her place. Think about that for a moment. The future queen consort, speaking about the future queen with barely concealed contempt. William felt his world tilting. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a difference of opinion. This was calculated, planned, sustained over months, perhaps years. He clicked through more files, each one adding another piece to a puzzle he never knew existed. Private meetings he was never told about. Decisions made in his name without his knowledge. A careful, patient effort to shift power while keeping him in the dark. His hands trembled slightly as he reached the final folder. Inside were photographs, images of Catherine at various palace events, her face marked with notes about her expressions, her interactions, her perceived weaknesses. Someone had been watching her, studying her, documenting everything. William pushed back from the desk, struggling to process what he'd just seen. This was Camilla, his father's wife, someone who sat at family dinners, who smiled at public events, who spoke of unity and tradition. How long had she been doing this? How had he not seen it? He thought about all the times things had seemed slightly off. Meetings that never happened, messages that never arrived, opportunities that quietly disappeared. He had blamed confusion, miscommunication, the natural chaos of palace life. But it wasn't chaos, it was design. William stood and walked to the window, looking out at the palace grounds bathed in soft morning light. Everything looked the same as it always had, beautiful, peaceful, perfect. But underneath that surface, something else had been growing, something dark and deliberate. His phone sat silent on the desk beside the glowing screen. He needed answers. He needed to understand the full scope of what had been done. But first, he needed to know, how long has this been going on? And who helped her hide it? The whistleblower. The whistleblower arrived within the hour, entering through a side entrance that few people knew existed. She was a senior aide who'd worked in the palace for nearly 15 years. Her face showed the weight of what she was about to reveal. Tired eyes, tense shoulders, the look of someone who'd carried a heavy secret for far too long. "How deep does this go?" William asked quietly. What she described next shattered everything William thought he knew about how the palace operated. Camilla had built her own private network over the years. Not the official staff everyone knew about, but a smaller, hidden circle of aides who answered only to her. They operated in the shadows of normal palace business, making quiet changes that seemed insignificant on their own, but created chaos when viewed together. These aides had access to schedules, correspondence, decision-making processes. They would adjust things just slightly, move a meeting here, delay a message there, redirect a question to someone else. Small actions that accumulated into something much larger. William listened. The whistleblower explained how his projects were systematically undermined. Proposals he submitted would be quietly edited before reaching the right people. Support he expected would mysteriously evaporate. Ideas he shared in confidence would somehow reach critics before supporters. But Catherine's initiatives faced even worse treatment. Her charitable work was blocked at administrative levels. Her attempts to modernize certain royal traditions met with sudden procedural obstacles. Her schedule was manipulated, so she appeared less present, less engaged, less capable than she actually was. Every time the Duchess tried to move forward, the whistleblower said softly, invisible walls appeared. But the manipulation went beyond blocking their work. Camilla had been actively pushing her own agenda, using the same hidden network to advance causes and connections that served her interests. She positioned herself as the real power behind palace decisions, the one who truly understood tradition and duty. And she'd been leaking information, carefully selected details about palace matters private family discussions, internal disagreements. She fed these pieces to certain journalists and influential figures, always in ways that protected her while damaging others. Stories that made William look indecisive, articles questioning Catherine's commitment, whispers about family tensions that painted Camilla as the patient peacemaker, while others appeared difficult or too modern. She controlled the narrative, the whistleblower explained. She made sure people saw what she wanted them to see. Then the whistleblower pulled out a small drive and inserted it into the computer. "There's one more thing you need to see. We call it the core file. It explains everything else, why she did this, what she was really working toward it." William turned back to the screen as a new folder opened. His hands gripped the edge of the desk as he began reading. The document showed something that made his blood run cold. Camilla had been influencing Charles during his most vulnerable moments, times when his father was tired, uncertain, or grieving. She would wait for these moments and then gently guide conversations, suggest perspectives, plant doubts. There were recordings of private discussions where she subtly questioned decisions that honored the late Queen's wishes. Perhaps that's too traditional for modern times. Maybe we should reconsider what she truly would have wanted. William saw evidence of her slowly reshaping his father's thinking on matters large and small. She praised Charles when he agreed with her views and created tension when he didn't. She isolated him from advisors who might offer different perspectives. But the worst discovery came in a series of messages from 2 years ago. William had tried to reconcile with his father during a particularly difficult period. He'd written letters, requested private meetings, reached out through trusted intermediaries. He remembered the silence that followed, the crushing feeling that his father wanted nothing to do with him. Now he knew why. Camilla had intercepted those attempts. Messages were redirected, never delivered, or edited to seem less sincere. Meeting requests were buried under scheduling conflicts that didn't actually exist. Intermediaries were told that Charles wasn't ready, that William needed to give it more time, that pushing now would only make things worse. "Your father never received most of your attempts to reach him," the whistleblower said quietly. William felt something break inside his chest. All those months of hurt and confusion, all those times he thought his father had rejected his attempts at peace, the growing distance between them that seemed impossible to bridge. It had been manufactured, deliberately created by someone who benefited from their separation. He thought about his grandmother, about the values she'd spent her life upholding: unity, duty, family. Everything she'd worked to protect had been quietly torn apart by someone who smiled at family gatherings and spoke about tradition. The anger came then, hot and sharp, but underneath it was something deeper, a profound sadness for what had been stolen from all of them. Time they could never get back, trust that had been broken, a father and son kept apart by lies. William closed the file and stood, his decision already made. This could not stay secret any longer. Confronting the king. William found his father in the private study, sitting in the chair by the window where he often retreated when the weight of the crown felt too heavy. Charles looked older than usual today, his face drawn with exhaustion that went deeper than lack of sleep. William closed the door behind him and locked it. The sound made Charles look up, surprised by the urgency. Something in William's expression made Charles straighten in his chair. He'd seen that look before, the same firm certainty his own mother had possessed when something truly important needed to be addressed. For a moment, neither spoke. The study felt too quiet, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Charles broke the silence first. He'd been feeling something wrong in the palace for months, he admitted, like a shadow he couldn't quite see but knew was there. William felt his throat tighten. His father had sensed it. Some part of him had known. He began explaining everything: the hidden files, the private network of aides, the manipulation of decisions and schedules. Charles listened without interrupting, his face growing paler with each revelation. Then William reached the hardest part: the reconciliation attempts that had been intercepted, the messages his father had never received, the meetings that had been prevented through lies and misdirection. William's voice broke slightly as he explained how all those months he thought his father didn't want to hear from him, didn't want reconciliation. Charles had never known William was trying to reach him at all. Charles stood abruptly, walking to the window. His shoulders were rigid, his breathing uneven. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. He had waited for William to reach out. He had thought his son had chosen distance. The realization of what had been stolen from them hung in the air like something physical and painful. Charles turned back to face his son, and William saw something he'd rarely witnessed: his father on the verge of tears. Charles admitted he'd seen signs, small things that didn't make sense, questions about decisions he didn't remember making, staff acting strangely when he asked about certain matters. But he'd ignored them all. He'd told himself he was imagining things, that stress was making him paranoid. William asked why, though he thought he already knew the answer. "Because I wanted peace," Charles said, his voice cracking. "After everything, the years of public scrutiny, the loss of your mother, the difficulty of finding my place, I just wanted something in my life to be simple." The admission settled between them like a weight. William felt anger and sympathy fighting inside his chest. His father had failed to protect them, but he'd also been a victim of the same careful manipulation. William leaned forward, his voice growing stronger. What mattered now was the choice going forward. If Charles continued to allow this, if he stayed silent or tried to smooth things over for the sake of peace, it would destroy everything, not just their family, the entire monarchy. Charles flinched as if struck. William pressed on. The crown survived on trust and unity. When people discovered that the palace had been run by manipulation and lies, when they learned that the king allowed his wife to tear apart his own family, they would lose faith in the institution itself. The silence until now was understandable, William said firmly. Silence going forward would be unforgivable. Charles stood, his face a mixture of pain and determination. He opened his mouth to respond. The door handle rattled. Then came a sharp knock. Camilla's voice cut through the room like ice. "Why is the door locked?" Father and son locked eyes as footsteps approached from the other side of the door. The moment of reckoning had arrived earlier than either had expected. "The performance ends." The door opened slowly, and Camilla stepped inside. Her face showed concern, perfectly measured and calm. She looked at Charles first, her expression softening in exactly the way she'd practiced over years. She moved toward him with gentle steps, reaching out to touch his arm. Her voice was honey-sweet. "Are you all right? You look so tired, so troubled. I've been worried about you all morning." Charles stood frozen, unable to respond. The contrast between what William had just revealed and the tenderness in Camilla's voice was jarring. almost painful to witness. She continued speaking, her words carefully chosen. Charles needed rest, she suggested. Whatever was troubling him could wait. The stress of his position was too much sometimes. William watched the performance with cold clarity. Every gesture, every concerned glance, every loving word, it was all part of the same manipulation he'd seen documented in those files. She was doing it right now, in front of him, as if he couldn't see exactly what she was doing. Camilla finally turned to acknowledge William, and for just a fraction of a second, something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, calculation, the awareness that something had shifted. But her voice remained sweet. "I hadn't expected to see you here so early. Is everything all right?" Charles found his voice then, quiet but firm. "I need to speak with William privately. There are matters we need to discuss." Something changed in Camilla's face. The softness remained, but underneath it, William could see her mind working rapidly. She agreed immediately. Of course, whatever Charles needed, she would always support him. Charles left the room, closing the door behind him. The click of the latch sounded final. The moment they were alone, Camilla's entire demeanor transformed. The sweetness vanished like a mask removed. Her shoulders straightened, her expression hardened, and when she spoke again, her voice was cold and sharp as winter glass. "What have you been telling him?" William met her gaze steadily. He'd told his father the truth, all of it. Camilla's eyes narrowed. She moved away from him, putting distance between them as if preparing for battle. Her next words came fast and defensive, each one carefully aimed. She denied everything. The files were fabricated. Someone was trying to destroy her reputation, to turn the family against her. William had been deceived by people who wanted to create division. When William mentioned the recordings, her voice grew sharper. Those had been taken out of context, she claimed, twisted to sound like something they weren't. Anyone could make innocent conversations seem sinister with the right editing. She blamed the whistleblower, a disgruntled staff member with an agenda, someone who'd been dismissed for incompetence and now wanted revenge. She blamed William's advisors. They'd never accepted her, she said. They wanted to maintain old power structures and saw her as a threat to their influence. She even blamed Catherine indirectly, suggesting that some people in the palace couldn't handle a modern approach to royal duties. William listened to each excuse, each deflection, each attempt to rewrite reality. He said nothing, just watched her perform this desperate defense. His silence seemed to unnerve her. She changed tactics, her voice dropping to something almost pleading. She reminded him of how hard she'd worked to support the family, to help Charles through difficult times, to modernize the monarchy's image. "Everything I've done has been for this family," she insisted. William finally spoke, his voice quiet but cutting. "Everything you've done has been for yourself, for your position, your power, your control." Camilla's expression turned to ice. She warned him to be very careful about what he chose to believe. The palace operated in complex ways he didn't fully understand yet. Actions that seemed questionable often served larger purposes. William took a step toward her. He understood perfectly well. Camilla's voice grew colder still. She told him he was making a terrible mistake, that pursuing this path would damage the monarchy in ways he couldn't imagine. Then came her final warning, delivered with perfect calculated precision. Removing me would break the family apart. Charles would never choose his son over his wife. The public would see it as you trying to seize power. The scandal would destroy everything the crown represented. She paused, letting the threat sink in. You think you're protecting the monarchy, but you'll tear it down yourself. William held her gaze without flinching. The truth would no longer be buried, not for appearances, not for peace, not for anything. He told her that she'd spent years hiding her actions in shadows, controlling narratives, manipulating people who trusted her. But those days are finished. Camilla studied him for a long moment, searching for weakness or doubt. She found none. Her expression shifted one final time, settling into something between contempt and resignation. She straightened her jacket with deliberate movements and walked toward the door. Before leaving, she turned back to look at him. Her voice was soft again, but this time, softness carried a threat rather than sweetness. You have no idea what you've just started. Then, she was gone. The truth unveiled. The royal council chamber had never felt so heavy with tension. William stood at the head of the long table, surrounded by the monarchy's most senior advisors, men and women who'd served the crown for decades, who'd witnessed scandals and crises, who prided themselves on maintaining composure in any situation. But today, their carefully controlled expressions were cracking. William had called the emergency meeting with strict protocols. The doors were locked. No phones allowed inside. Guards stood outside with orders that no one could enter or leave until the session concluded. He'd brought everything: the original files, the recordings, the documented evidence of manipulation spanning years. He'd organized it all the night before with Catherine's help, creating a clear timeline that even the most skeptical advisor couldn't dismiss. Now, he presented it piece by piece, letting the evidence speak for itself. The first file showed the hidden network of aides and how they operated. Several advisors leaned forward, their eyes widening as they recognized names, people they'd worked with, trusted, never suspecting a deeper loyalty. One senior advisor, Lord Pelton, removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly, a gesture William recognized as his way of processing disturbing information. The next section detailed the manipulation of palace decisions. William watched as understanding dawned on faces around the table. Things that hadn't made sense before suddenly had an explanation. Lady Morrison, who oversaw royal communications, went pale as she saw evidence of leaked information. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned pages, recognizing stories she'd tried to prevent. Then came the recordings of Camilla's private conversations. Her voice filled the sealed room, speaking with cold calculation about limiting William's authority and reducing Catherine's public presence. The silence that followed was absolute. Lord Pelton broke it, his voice rough with emotion. He'd suspected something was wrong, he admitted. Small inconsistencies that troubled him, but that he couldn't quite prove. Other advisors began speaking then, their words tumbling out as if a dam had broken. They too had noticed strange patterns, questions about matters they knew had been resolved, staff behaving oddly when certain topics arose, a sense that palace operations had become opaque in ways they couldn't define. "We feared her influence," Lady Morrison said quietly, "but we never had proof. And without proof, speaking up seemed like paranoia or politics." The admission hung in the air. These were the Crown's most experienced advisors, and they'd all sensed the problem but felt powerless to address it. When William finished presenting all the evidence, the room remained silent for several long minutes. Lord Pelton spoke first, addressing the reality they all now faced. Removing a queen consort was extraordinarily rare. The last time such action had been considered was centuries ago. But, he continued carefully, it was possible. If the evidence showed actions that threatened the stability of the crown itself, if her continued presence posed danger to the institution, then procedures existed. William looked at each advisor in turn. His grandmother had taught him that duty sometimes required impossible choices. This was one of those moments. "I'm ordering you to begin the formal process," William said firmly. "All of it. Documentation, legal review, preparation of evidence. I want everything done properly and thoroughly." The advisors exchanged glances. Then, one by one, they nodded their agreement. When silence breaks, the palace gates were surrounded by sunrise. Cameras lined every possible angle. Reporters stood shoulder to shoulder. Satellite trucks blocked nearby streets. The whispers that had started as quiet rumors had exploded into deafening speculation across every news channel in the world. Headlines screamed questions nobody could answer yet. What was happening inside the palace? Why had senior advisors been in emergency meetings? Why did the king look so troubled at his last public appearance? The most persistent question was the simplest. What had Camilla done? Camilla tried to control the narrative. She called trusted journalists. She released statements expressing confusion about the rumors and commitment to her royal duties. She appeared briefly in public, her face showing perfect concern and grace. But her attempts felt hollow this time. Too many people had seen too much. Reporters who'd protected her before now asked harder questions. Charles became the story's most visible evidence that something had truly broken. At a scheduled engagement, cameras caught him standing noticeably apart from Camilla. Where they usually appeared together, presented a united front. Now there was distance. Physical distance that viewers measured in feet. Emotional distance that showed in Charles's expression. Tired, troubled, profoundly sad. When Camilla reached for his arm during a photo opportunity, he gently but clearly moved away. The gesture lasted only seconds, but cameras captured it from every angle. Within an hour, the clip had been viewed millions of times. Inside, William worked with advisors on the official statement. Every word was debated, revised, reviewed. The announcement needed to be clear but careful, honest but measured. It would change everything, and there would be no taking it back. Catherine became his anchor through it all. When William doubted the timing, she reminded him why this mattered. As someone he, worried about his father's pain, she gently pointed out that truth was the only path to real healing. "You're doing the right thing," she told him during a particularly difficult moment. The hardest thing, but the right thing. The statement went through its final review. Legal approved it. The king had seen it and given his painful consent. The advisors agreed it was as good as it could be. News channels went to breaking coverage. Cameras focused on palace gates. The world held its breath. The palace announced that Queen Consort Camilla would be stepping back from all royal duties, effective immediately. But the palace had chosen clarity over carefully constructed vagueness. The document laid out the facts with precision and dignity. 1. Camilla had maintained a hidden network of loyal aides who operated outside normal palace structures. 2. She had manipulated decisions affecting both William and Catherine's roles. 3. She had leaked sensitive information to shape public narratives in her favor. Most damaging of all, she had systematically worked to keep Charles separated from his son during crucial periods of potential reconciliation. The evidence was summarized, but not sensationalized. The tone was measured but unflinching. William appeared on camera 2 hours later to address the situation directly. He stood alone in one of the palace's formal rooms, his bearing straight, his voice steady. He spoke about duty and truth, about the difficult choice between protecting appearances and protecting the monarchy's integrity. "The crown belongs to the people," William said, his eyes direct and honest. "When we fail to uphold the values we represent, we betray that sacred trust." He acknowledged the pain this revelation would cause, particularly to his father. But he made clear that the alternative, allowing manipulation and deception to continue, would have caused far greater harm. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Public support poured in from across the globe. People respected the honesty, the willingness to confront painful truth rather than hide behind tradition and silence. Social media filled with messages of support for William and Catherine. Commentators praised the courage it took to expose wrongdoing at the highest levels. Even those usually critical of the monarchy acknowledged that this kind of transparency was exactly what modern institutions needed. The aftermath. Within the palace, Camilla's world collapsed with stunning speed. Staff, who'd once rushed to fulfill her requests, now moved slowly or found reasons to be elsewhere. Advisors who'd sought her opinions stopped including her in conversations. Invitations to events quietly stopped arriving. The isolation was complete and deliberate. She'd built her power on networks of loyalty and strategic relationships. Now, those same networks dissolved as people distanced themselves from someone who'd become toxic to associate with. But the real healing began quietly, away from cameras and public statements. Charles and William started meeting regularly, often just the two of them in Charles's private study. They talked about the years that had been stolen through manipulation. They discussed the late Queen and what she would have wanted for the family. They worked through anger and hurt with honesty that had been impossible when lies stood between them. It wasn't easy. Some conversations were painful. Some silences were heavy with things that couldn't be undone. But they were talking, truly talking, for the first time in years. William brought Catherine to some meetings, and Charles saw clearly what Camilla had tried so hard to diminish: his daughter-in-law's wisdom, strength, and genuine care for the institution. He apologized to Catherine directly for not protecting her from treatment she should never have faced. The family began focusing on unity and healing, not the performative unity they'd maintained for appearances, but real connection built on truth, mutual respect, the choice that saved the crown. Months passed. The media storm gradually calmed. The palace returned to its duties with a renewed sense of purpose and clarity. One evening, William stood in the same room where he'd first discovered the hidden files. So much had changed since that morning. The truth had been painful, but it had also been necessary. He thought about his future as king. The path ahead was clearer now, built on foundations that were honest and strong. He'd learned that protecting the monarchy sometimes meant exposing its wounds rather than hiding them. Catherine found him there, understanding without words what he was thinking about. He turned to her and smiled. They had faced the storm together and emerged stronger. The crown would survive because someone had finally been willing to stand up and tell the truth, even when silence would have been easier. So here's what I want you to think about. How many other institutions, governments, corporations, sullies, are being quietly controlled by people operating in shadows? How many relationships have been destroyed by someone who benefited from division? And most importantly, would you have had the courage to do what William did? To expose someone so close to power, knowing it would cause pain to people you love? William made an impossible choice. He chose truth over peace, honesty over appearance, the long-term health of the institution over short-term comfort. History will judge whether he was right, but one thing is certain: he was willing to risk everything to protect what the crown truly represents. What do you think? Did William make the right decision? Should Camilla be completely removed? Or was this too extreme? And here's the question that keeps me up at night: what else don't we know? If this level of manipulation was happening for years without anyone stopping it, what other secrets are still buried in palace walls? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Share this with anyone who's been following the royal drama. Subscribe for updates as this story continues to develop, because something tells me this isn't over. The palace may have removed Camilla from public duties, but the scars from what she did will take years to heal. And William? He's just begun his journey as the future king who chose truth over tradition. The monarchy will never be the same.